the expression of the genre, with the expansion of the genre of reality TV shows, Steiner was interested not in the representation of that which could be grasped by the five senses alone, but by that which could be perceived by the spirit and the imagination. At the same time, because he believed that all arrangements and forms of matter unconsciously influence the spirit and the psyche of the individual, he, like other modernists such as Frank Lloyd Wright and the founding member of the Bauhaus, saw no division between art and design. And you see this in his two versions of the Goetheano. Quoting from Steiner, "Whoever is capable of recognizing and judging spiritual matters knows all too well that an era's manners, customs, affinities, and forms of good and evil are influenced by the way those things are constructed, which we walk by every day, and by which we are surrounded from morning till night. The art we view, the spaces we inhabit, the objects with which we interact should exert a positive influence on our development." Both Goethe and Steiner viewed human beings as individuals endowed with the capacity to define themselves and the moral responsibility to do so with an awareness of their connectedness to the past and to each other in the present. Thinking through their notions of Bildung encourages us to search in our own day for connections and for spaces for discovery, and to think broadly about the four meanings of Bildung mentioned at the beginning of this talk. Bildung as image, as growth, as cultivation of the spirit, and as institutional concept. Bildung as image. In our image of the students we aim to educate and form, we must pay close attention to the triadic structure of the state, the economy, and the arts. We must educate individuals to be informed citizens capable of, among other things, reading between the lines of political ads, over half of which in the last election earned foul calls from the Michigan Truth Squad. We must educate students to find jobs, and we must educate them to think with their imaginations, to see connections between art and science, the individual and the environment. Finally, recalling the misuses of the concept of Bildung in the past, our image of our students must be one of inclusivity. The education we provide must have space to accommodate different backgrounds and learning styles. Bildung as growth. We must set our standards high. Our standards cannot differ from those of other institutions, even if our methods must reflect the type of institution we are and serve the student body that comes to us. Thinking about the concept of Bildung as growth also encourages us to see ourselves as educating students for a rapidly educating future, one in which they may change careers many times. They must acquire transferable skills, not necessarily associated with one discipline or another. This means we must not separate so-called content instruction from skill instruction, that we should not treat lab instruction, English composition, language instruction, or training in library and research skills as the menial work of the university, but rather as the core of all of our work, as a center, as a basis for skills that must be developed from first-year gen ed classes through senior capstone courses. Long after a student forgets that book, or what that book was about that she remembers liking or hating so much, she will have the writing skills that she began to hone when she wrote about it. Bildung is cultivation of the soul. We should encourage the practice of inside out. We should help students to see the connections by making sure there are institutionally supported ways for them not only to double major, but to do so in vastly different disciplinary areas: art and biology, German and economics, women's studies and physics, marketing and philosophy. We should help students to see the relationship between knowledge and imagination, and to see and recognize that the experience and knowledge that they bring with them to the university may help them to see patterns that we ourselves don't recognize. Bildung as institutional structure. On the one hand, we must refuse to separate research and teaching, theory and praxis. At the same time, I remain an advocate, especially at the undergraduate level, of disciplinary structure. The concept of metamorphosis helps us to remember that forms and structures, including disciplinary forms, will change over time. Disciplines are not absolute, but they are thought structures, case studies, frameworks that help students to work towards the goal outlined in the accreditation standards of the Higher Learning Commission of developing the capacity to sift and winnow massive amounts of information in order to discover or create new or better understandings of ourselves and the world we live in. We should consider training in any disciplinary field a framework for asking questions and for learning that will give students the skills they need to enter into other fields and to work across fields. There are, and this will hardly come as a surprise to anyone here, plenty of areas in which we fall short of these ideals of Bildung. An expansive image of the individuals our students might become is blocked by ever stricter disciplinary requirements in some fields. Moreover, it is no news that the humanities are being devalued and dismantled with mountaintop removal efficiency. Steep funding cuts in Great Britain may eliminate all public subsidies for university subjects like art and the humanities. SUNY Albany has just closed a number of humanities programs, and the University of Toronto narrowly escaped having its comparative literature program shut down. Here at Wayne State, opportunities for students to use their educations as springboards for further development are blocked by abysmally low graduation rates. And student abilities to think outside the box, to explore relationships between inside and outside, are hampered by increasing tuition, an increasing burden of student loans, and the related need to work ever longer hours. Our mission to form our students is hampered any time we indicate that teaching is less important than research. It is hampered if we become so afraid of any notion of discipline that we fail to provide students with frameworks in which they can begin to see connections. It is hampered by an increasing reliance on part-time faculty, many of whom are women, whose salaries do not acknowledge the importance of their work, much of it in courses that form the core of our students' educations. Yet in the midst of all of this doom and gloom, there are amazing examples around us of creative and effective Bildungspraxis. One can see positive images of whom our students might become in the Med Start program, which guarantees med school slots to incoming freshmen and allows them to pursue any undergraduate major to which they feel called. Projects that encourage a positive relationship between the individual and its environment include the bike lane that is being created on Anthony Wayne Drive, the farmers market, the campus vegetable gardens, and the great public art we have on campus. I passed Bruce White's Helios Trail on my way from the bus stop to my office, and it never fails to inspire me after my bus ride past the many abandoned buildings along Woodward. Bildung as cultivation of the soul is promoted by the Alternative Spring Break and Detroit program and by the opportunities the university offers for art study abroad. Our institutional strength is improved by all instructors who respond to student difficulties, not by accepting excuses or lowering their standards, but by breaking down the learning process into steps that are manageable. It is also improved by those who work to rethink educational frameworks, as the Humanities Center has done in organizing this symposium. We must continue to seek ways to bring opposites together, to encourage students to think with all of their senses. We must encourage students to seek different types of knowledge, and we must continue to develop curricula that do not separate the teaching of skills from the teaching of content. Our vision must not be one of whom we and our students are, but one of whom we are capable of becoming. Thanks.
Once again, we do have time for questions.
It strikes me that you're talking especially, but a number of others that remind me of a parallel in Victorian England when Cardinal Newman and Matthew Arnold were defending a certain conception of education against what was perceived as very instrumentalist and practical, and getting rid of the things that Arnold and Newman and others thought were so important. So I guess one observation is, well, more things change, they stay the same, but also it's clear there's a moment of crisis here that we're all responding to.
Yeah, and I don't think we can reject scientific, technological education. I think we actually need to do both. I really do think that we need students who major in sciences and the arts, or in business and philosophy. I think that's necessary.
Are you referring to Newman's The Idea of the University?
Yeah.
What's
So
that? Sorry.
if he's referring to Cardinal Newman's The Idea of the University, what would be the idea of the university that could do what you want?
One that had funding.
It's as simple as that? It's as simple as that? Is it really that simple?
Well, I think what you see happening is this public funding is coming out of university. Scholars have to earn their own, pay their own way, basically, which means a reliance on business and funding from things that have clear goals. And that means that what gets cut or what gets disappeared are the humanities.
So we go back to the question from this morning, which is, if the sociological and historical context of Bildung is quote-unquote elitist, I don't actually accept that, but if that's what it is, part of the way in which, well, part of the problem then is that modernity sees a crisis of democratization. And as a result of the democratization, ideals that were once fundamentally aristocratic ideals become, or bourgeois ideals, become more widely accessible. Then you encounter the problem, which becomes a fundamentally economic and political problem. How do you continue to pay for that, which then leads to a crisis? So we don't have an agreed idea. We do not live in a culture that is capable of generating an idea of the university in the way that Arnold and Newman thought possible. We wouldn't know where to start to generate. So this is actually a crisis of democracy. It's not just a crisis of education. It's a far wider crisis, and we are simply the epiphenomena of that crisis. And that's where I think the concept of, the negative concept of Bildung should be taking us to say, now we have a model to begin to analyze the crisis rather than simply to say, to repeat what our needs are. We all know what the needs are. The model is broken down.
And may I just add to this? It's broken up down in different ways in different countries.
Yeah.
And I'm always, at odds when I talk to my colleagues, let's say in Germany, telling them how eager we are to get a larger enrollment. And they just said, oh my God, we have 200 people in a seminar, we can't teach anymore. And that situation is precisely a consequence of what you're saying.
The same in France
Yes.
as well. Jacques Chirac, when he was Prime Minister under Mitterrand, wanted to go to a British-American model, which he thought would be more efficient and actually in some ways more democratic. Every middle-class family was on the street. And what was it that Chirac wanted? Smaller classes. He wanted smaller classes. As it is, the system is so inefficient that everyone in France knows that real selection doesn't begin effectively until the third year of university. So it is different models in different countries.
And I mean, I agree with you about, where do you find, the real sort of inclusivity? Where do you find this ideal sort of education? At elite schools, with their beautiful campuses, even, private Waldorf schools with their, it's a democratic and also an economic issue.
But I didn't hear you say that you were advocating the best of best response, that we're talking about a lot of practical entailments of universities such as adjunct pay, and whether we can have interdisciplinary majors, and so on. And I don't think that's the kind of, those are not the kind of considerations that fall directly from college on the hill.
They're happening at the College on the Hill. They're actually, they happen there because you have smaller classrooms and you don't have adjuncts sort of teaching there.
Right.
I'm saying they need to happen here, and it's actually been more important that they happen here. I actually do, I am kind of optimistic. I think there's a lot of things in place. I think there's a wide range of models for teaching. I think what we tend to do in educational systems is that we say, oh, now we have to do something new. And so, you know, first it's, you know, lecture classes, and then it's small classes because we don't like chalk and talk, and then it's web classes, without really seeing how these different things are connected to one another. And so I do think actually that looking at connections and not being so isolated in our own departments and not being so cut off from beginning level education is extremely important.